Updating the firmware on your Zcam may sound complicated, but I promise it's very easy to do, and I'm going to show you how. Let's go. There are essentially two methods to updating the firmware on your camera. The first method that I'm going to show you involves using some kind of media card and loading the firmware on there, and the second method is using an Ethernet cable. The first method is the most simple one in my opinion, and it applies for both CFast cards and SSDs. But of course, before any of this, you're going to want to download the proper firmware. And you're going to do that by going to Zcam's website. I'm going to actually link directly below to their updates page. Then, like I said, this applies for CFast or SSD. You're just going to plug one of those into your computer, whichever one you have, whatever's more convenient. And then simply drag and drop the .fw file onto your SSD or CFast card. And then you're going to plug this back into the camera. In the menu, go all the way down to the bottom settings, scroll all the way down, and you will see the camera's current firmware. Click this, and then you should be asked if you want to update the firmware. Select yes, and the camera will restart, and when it comes back on, you'll be operating on the most recent firmware. Now, if you're having any problems with the firmware not showing up, one possible problem is something that I ran into one time was that I accidentally put the .fw file into a subfolder within the CFast card, and it didn't read it. So make sure it is directly on your CFast and not in a subfolder. The other thing could be that if your camera is running on the firmware 0.94 or under, you're going to have to rename the .fw to a .zip. It just won't read the newer .fw format. The second method, which involves using an Ethernet cable, is, in my opinion, probably more for those cameras that are tucked away in a hard-to-reach place and are already being controlled by Ethernet cable. But with that being said, what you're going to need is an Ethernet cable, and I would actually suggest getting one of these little adapters that is Ethernet to USB-C, because it's going to make it a lot easier to connect it to your computer or laptop or whatever. But then, once you've got that all connected, you're going to go to the menu. In the menu, go to Connect, then Network, ETH Mode, and then Direct. Then you're going to go to your browser, and the easier way for me is actually to go to Zcam's website, to their update page, and they actually have a link there. And once you go to that link, the Zcam web client should show up. And on a side note, if you haven't played around with this before, this is actually a pretty fun way to just completely remotely control your camera through Ethernet, which is a very nice thing to have. I mean, and you can control everything. So if you haven't played with it before, I would suggest trying it. It's fun. Once on the web client page, scroll to Miscellaneous at the bottom, then Upgrade, and import the firmware file. When it asks, click Upgrade. Your camera will restart, and you'll be on the new firmware. And that's it. Like I said, it's pretty simple to upgrade the firmware in your Zcam, but if you've got any questions, feel free to message us here or on our Facebook or Instagram linked below. This is the first video of many that we will be putting out, so if you're interested in more Zcam or video production related content, consider subscribing, and thank you for watching.